Are you tired of the usual top 10 open world games like GD5, The Witcher 3, Skyrim? Everyone has played those and we know they are masterpieces. But let's focus on the underrated open world games. The hidden gems. These are unique soulful experiences, often rough around the edges, and does not have the usual big budget marketing or attention from mainstream critics. So forget the generic checklist simulators for a second. Put down that Assassin's Creed 9900 because it's time to explore the truly unique open world games you probably never played before or never heard of. Mad Max. When people talk about great open world games based on movies, they usually forget about Mad Max. And that is a huge mistake. This game captures the thirsty and brutal feeling of the movies perfectly, and it's one of the most underrated open world games from the last 10 years. You play as Max and your goal is simple because you just want to build the ultimate car called the Magnum Opus so you can survive the wasteland. It starts off with Max losing everything and being left for dead in the desert. So you have to scavenge for scrap metal parts to turn a rusty bucket of bolts into a literal tank on wheels. The car combat is the real star of the show here, and it feels better than almost any other game that involves driving. You aren't just racing around because you're actually trying to tear the cars apart using a harpoon gun and side-mounted flamethrowers and heavy armor. There's nothing more satisfying than using your grappling hook to rip the wheel off an enemy vehicle or pulling a sniper out of its tower while you're speeding past at 80 miles per hour. As you upgrade your car, it becomes faster and deadlier, and you really start to feel like the king of the road in a world where everyone wants you to kill you. When you are in your car, you're exploring enemy camps and fighting bandits on foot using a combat system that feels a lot like the Batman Arkham games. It's heavy and crunchy, and Max hits like a truck, using shivs and shotguns and his bare fists to take down a group of war boys. The world itself is surprisingly beautiful even though it is just a giant desert because of the lightning and sandstorms are incredible to look at. When a massive storm rolls in with lightning and flying debris, you actually feel the danger and have to find cover or risk getting blown away. The loop of clearing out territories and helping different stronghold leaders is really addictive because every upgrade you get makes a noticeable difference. You might be hunting for water and food to stay alive or looking for a special car body to change how your vehicle looks, but everything you do feels like it matters for your survival. It is a lonely and atmospheric game that doesn't hold your hand too much, and it deserves way more credit for how it handles exploration and vehicle customization. If you missed this one when it came out, you should definitely go back and play it because there still isn't any other game quite like it. Lost Judgment. If you love the Yakuza series but want something with a bit more mystery and even crazier action, then Lost Judgment is a game you have to play. A lot of people pass it up because they think they need to play 100 other games before just to understand the story. But this game stands on its own as an incredible detective thriller. You play as Takayuki Yagami, who is a private investigator with some seriously cool martial arts skills. The game takes place in the bright neon streets of Kamurocho and a massive new area in Yokohama, and it feels like a place you could actually get lost in because there's so much detail everywhere you look. The combat is some of the best that RGG Studios has ever made, and it's super fast and flashy. You have different fighting styles that you can switch between instantly depending on who you are fighting. Crane style is great for taking on big groups of thugs with wide kicks, and Tiger style is perfect for focusing all your power on one tough brute boss. There's also Snake style that lets you disarm enemies and use their own momentum against them, which feels amazing when someone tries to pull a gun on you. Every fight feels like a scene from a high-budget action movie, and all the animations are so smooth that you never get tired of beating up bad guys. This is the peak gameplay from the Yakuza style of games from RGG Studios. Also, one of the things that makes this game special is the school setting, because a big part of the story involves Agami going undercover at a high school to solve a bullying case that turns into something much darker. This opens up a ton of minigames called school stories where you can join the dance club, or the robotics club, or even a biker gang. It sounds silly, but these stories are actually really deep and give you a break from the main serious mystery. You get to build relationships with the students and help them out while also doing detective work like using a drone to spy on suspects or using a robotic dog to sniff out clues. Now, the main story is really heavy and deals with some serious themes about justice and the law, but it's written so well that you'll stay glued to your screen to see what happens next. When you aren't chasing down leads, you can spend hours just playing arcade games or going to the batting cages just eating at all the different restaurants. It is one of those open world games that feels small enough to learn every street but big enough to always have a surprise waiting around the corner. If you want a game that has a perfect mix of a serious detective story and a really wild side content, then Last Judgment is a masterpiece that deserves way more love, honestly. Watch Dogs from 2014. Now, the world itself is surprisingly detailed. Chicago is packed with NPCs that feel like real people going about their day. And the game has this sense of constant movement and danger. You can tail someone through the city, hack their phone to get the info, or set traps using the environment. It's clever because it gives you so many different ways to approach missions. You can be sneaky, or you can just go guns blazing, with your hacking tools making everything explode or fall apart around you. The driving is solid too. Cars feel weighty, crashes are satisfying, and driving through the streets while escaping cops or taking down targets is tense and fun. Now, the story itself is a mix of personal revenge and bigger conspiracy stuff. Now, it's not super deep or emotional like some modern story-driven games, but it keeps you invested in Aiden and the people around him. Side missions and online features also add a lot to this game. You can invade other players' games, hack them, or be hacked yourself, which adds a unique tension that most open world games don't have. It's a little weird at first, but it's actually a really cool idea that makes the world feel alive and unpredictable. Combat is interesting because the game pushes you to think differently. You can fight with guns, but your hacking gives you tools that are often more powerful. You can turn the environment into a weapon, set up distractions, or mess with the enemy's cars and phones to take them down without even firing a shot. That kind of gameplay was pretty fresh back when it came out, and even now it feels unique in a world of generic open world games. I really think Watch Dogs is one of those underrated open world games that feels different from anything else. It's not perfect at all. The story is a bit messy and some missions get very repetitive, but it's creative. The world is alive and the hacking mechanics make you feel clever every time you play. If you skipped it back then, it's worth going back to because it still has that mix of fun, strategy, and chaos that most open world games don't bother trying anymore. Now, the next game is Scarface, The World Is Yours. Now, this is a delisted game, but you can still find it on many abandonware sites, I reckon. So, most people call this a Grand Theft Auto clone, but it actually does a lot of things better than GTA did back then, especially when it comes to the empire building and the combat. So, you start with nothing but a tiny little car and a pistol, and you have to slowly take back every neighborhood in Miami by making deals and taking out rival gangs. And the gameplay loop is really addictive because you aren't just doing random missions for people you don't care about. Everything you do is about making Tony rich and powerful again. So you spend a lot of time dealing drugs, doing small time pushers, and then using that money to buy big businesses like jewelry stores and hotels. You have to actually negotiate the price of the drugs using a little meter, and if you mess up the deal, the other guy might try to kill you, which makes every transaction feels intense. Once you get enough money, you can buy exotics like fancy cars and huge boats, or even hire henchmen like an assassin or a driver to help you out during missions. One of the most unique things about this game is the balls meter, which fills up by doing crazy stuff during combat like taunting your enemies after you shoot them or getting headshots. When the meter is full, you can go into blind rage mode where the screen turns red and you become invincible for a short time with infinite ammo. It makes you feel exactly like Tony Montana from the movie because you're just screaming insults and blasting everyone inside. The game also has a really honorable side because Tony refuses to hurt innocent people. So If you try to aim at a civilian, he will just lower his gun and say something about how he doesn't need that kind of trouble. Honestly, it's a huge shame that this game is so hard to find even on modern consoles and PCs because it's easily one of the most and best open world crime games ever made, and it still holds up today if you can find a way to play it. Far Cry Primal. Most people think of Far Cry and immediately imagine crazy explosions and guys with machine guns, but Far Cry Primal took a massive risk by getting rid of all technology and going back to the Stone Age. It came out right after Far Cry 4, so a lot of fans thought it was just going to be a simple skin on top of the old game, but it actually feels completely different once you start playing. You play as Takar, who is a hunter trying to survive in the land of Oros, which is a beautiful and dangerous world filled with woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers. Since there are no guns, you have to rely on bows and spears and clubs, which makes the combat feel way more personal and scary. You can just stand on a hill and snipe everyone from a mile away with a silencer because you have to get close and use stealth to survive. The best part of the whole game is the Beast Master system, where you can actually tame the predators you find in the wild. You can have a pet wolf that helps you track enemies or a giant bear that acts like a tank and smashes through enemy camps for you. You can even ride a saber-toothed tiger into battle, which is one of the coolest things you can do in any open world games ever. The world of Oros is one of the most immersive maps Ubisoft has ever created because it feels truly ancient and wild. Since you are at the bottom of the food chain starting out, you really feel the danger when the sun goes down and the most aggressive animals came out to hunt you. You have to carry a torch to keep their predators away and find wood to build fires so you don't freeze to death or get eaten in the dark. The game even uses a totally made up language based on what scientists think people actually sounded like thousands of years ago, which makes the whole experience feel even more real. Now, even though it doesn't have the vehicles or the big guns of other Far Cry games, the sense of progression is super satisfying because you're building up your village, helping your tribe grow, and as you rescue people and bring them back home, you unlock new skills and better weapons like double shot bows and fire bombs. It's a very relaxing but also intense game that focuses on the relationship between humans and nature, and it stands out as one of the most unique entries in the entire series. If you're tired of the same old shooters and want an open world that feels like a prehistoric survival movie, then you definitely need to give Primal a chance. It does have some repetition of the usual Far Cry games, camps to clear and stuff like that, but just ignore that, alright? Just go and think it as a different game from Far Cry. Immortals Phoenix Rising. Ubisoft is usually known for making massive games like Assassin's Creed that can sometimes feel a bit too serious or a little too exhausting to finish. But Immortals Phoenix Rising is different. It's a super colorful and light-hearted take on Greek mythology that takes a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild while adding its own unique spin on things. When it first came out, a lot of people just called it a Zelda clone and ignored it because the characters looked a bit like they were from a mobile game, but that was a huge mistake because this is actually one of the most fun and polished open world games Ubisoft has ever built. You play as a hero named Phoenix who has to save the Greek gods from a giant monster named Typhon who has basically taken over their home and turned everyone to stone. Now, what makes the game really stand out is the narration because the whole story is being told by Zeus and Prometheus while you're actually playing. They are constantly bickering and making jokes about things you're doing or arguing about how the real Greek myths actually happened. It's generally funny and makes the whole world feel much less lonely than other open world games because you always have these two powerful gods talking in your ear. The writing is surprisingly pretty good and pokes fun at even the source material in a way that shows the developers really knew their stuff. Even if you don't know much about Greek gods, and you will get a kick out of how much Zeus acts like a grumpy dad who doesn't want to admit he's messed up. The combat is much faster and more arcade-like than something like Assassin's Creed because you have access to literal godly powers from the very start. You can summon giant spears from the ground to launch enemies into the air, or use a massive hammer to smash them into the dirt. You also get the wings of Daedalus, which lets you double jump and glide all over the map, and it feels incredibly smooth to transition from fighting on the ground to soaring over a canyon. There are no weapons that break here, so you can just focus on getting stronger and unlocking new abilities that makes you feel like a total powerhouse. Every region of the map is themed after a different god like Aphrodite or Ares, and they all have their own look and feel with tons of puzzles and tons of puzzles hidden everywhere. Sleeping Dogs is probably the most underrated open world game of all time, and it's a crime that we never got a sequel. It came out right around the same time as other massive crime games, and people just assumed it was another generic city sandbox, but they were totally wrong. You play as Wei Shan, who is an undercover cop from San Francisco who goes back to Hong Kong to infiltrate the triads. The story is super intense because Wei starts to get too close to the people he's supposed to be arresting, and you really feel the pressure of him trying to keep his two lives separate. The best thing about this game that it's not just about shooting guns, because the focus is entirely on hand-to-hand combat. Since it takes place in Hong Kong, you're using Kung Fu to take down groups of enemies, and it feels way more satisfying than just pulling a trigger. You can use the environment to finish people off, like throwing someone into a dumpster or slamming a car door onto them, or even using a giant fan in a kitchen. As you play, you unlock different and new martial arts moves and combos that make you feel like you're staring at a classic Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan movie. The hits feel heavy and the animations are brutal, and it never gets old even after hours of playing. Hong Kong itself is one of the coolest cities ever put into a video game because it feels so dense and alive. The streets are narrow and filled with neon signs and food stalls where you can actually buy pork buns to heal your character. Rain looks incredible on the wet pavements, and driving through the city at night while listening to the radio is a really vibe. Now, speaking of the driving, the car mechanics are really fun and arcadey, and you can even do a leap from your car onto another vehicle while you're speeding down the highway. It makes the chase scenes feel like something out of a high-speed action flick. There is so much to do outside of the main story, like entering illegal street races, or going to karaoke bars, or even betting on cockfights. You also have a wardrobe full of cool outfits that give you different bonuses like better damage or more respect from the police. The voice acting is also amazing, with some really famous actors involved, and makes the character feel like real people that you actually care about. If you want an open world game that has a better story than most movies and combat that actually makes you feel like martial artist master, then you have to play Sleeping Dogs for real. The Saboteur. You really have to understand the tragedy behind this game because it was the very last thing Pandemic Studios ever made. These were the guys who gave us the original Star Wars Battlefront and Mercenaries, so they knew exactly how to make things blow up in a way that felt good. Now, EA basically told them the studio was closing down while they were still finishing the game, and you can kind of feel that unfinished energy in some parts of the world. It came out in 2009, and it was trying to do something that even GTA and Assassin's Creed weren't doing it at the time, which was mixing stealth, then driving, and climbing in a historical setting that actually felt miserable. The coolest mechanic in the game is the will to fight system, and it's not just a visual trick. When you are in a district that is heavily occupied by the Nazi forces, the entire screen is literally black and white like an old 1940s film. But the only things that have colors are the red armbands and flags of the soldiers, and it makes the world feel cold and scary, and it actually changes how you play because the civilians in those areas are too afraid to help you, and the guards are everywhere. Once you start blowing up their fuel tanks and killing their generals, the color literally bleeds back into the neighborhood, and certainly the French people will start fighting back in the streets to help you escape. The main character, Sean Devlin, is also a big departure from your typical hero because he's just a drunk Irish race car driver who wants to kill a specific Nazi officer who murdered his best friend. He's not a super soldier, so if you get into a big shootout, you're probably going to die pretty fast. You have to spend a lot of time on the rooftops And the climbing feels a bit heavy and clunky compared to modern games, but it works because Sean is just a regular guy pulling himself up the ledges. He can also steal a bunch of different 1940s cars, and since Sean is a racer, they actually go pretty fast and have a decent weight to them when you are drifting around the tight corners of Paris. One of the most unique things is the suspicion meter, which is much better than the stars in GTA. If you are dressed like a civilian, you can walk right past guards as long as you don't do anything weird like running or jumping over fences. But the game lets you kill a soldier and take his uniform, which is a huge deal because it lets you sneak into restricted areas. If you get too close to a guard, though, he will start to notice your accent or that uniform that doesn't fit right, and his little yellow bar will fill up. It creates this really intense feeling where you're trying to act natural while also standing next to a tank you just rigged with dynamite. It is a very special game that deserved a sequel, and it is a shame that we never got to see this version of Paris ever again. Days Gone. Now, Days Gone is one of those open world games that a lot of people slept on, even though it's actually massive and really well done. You play as Deacon St. John, a drifter and biker trying to survive in a world overrun by freakers, which are basically fast zombie creatures. The game takes place in the Pacific Northwest, and the world feels huge, wild, and kinda alive. Forests, mountains, small towns, rivers, and highways are all connected in the open world, and traveling by motorcycle is the best part because it makes you feel like you're really part of the world. Your bike isn't just for getting around, it's also your lifeline. You have to fuel it, maintain it, upgrade it, which makes every ride a bit more tense and personal. What makes Days Gone stand out is the way it mixes survival, action, and story. You're not just running around killing enemies, you're dealing with the world that reacts to you. Freakers roam in huge hordes that feel insane, and getting caught in one without planning is basically suicide. But that's also what makes it fun. You can set traps, sneak around, or just ride through a horde guns blazing. If you're feeling reckless, the game balances stealth, combat, and exploration really well, and it gives you a sense of freedom in how you handle situations. Side missions, camps, and random encounters make the world feel like it's actually lived in, not just a backdrop for the main story. The story itself is surprisingly emotional for a survival action game. Deacon has this tragic past, and the game slowly reveals his relationships, losses, and struggles as he tries to survive and protect the people he cares about. It's the kind of story that doesn't feel forced. It's messy, human, and sometimes brutal, which fits perfectly with the world you're living in. The mechanics are also solid. Shooting and melee combat feels good. Crafting is useful without being tedious, and your bike controls smoothly whether you're cruising on the highway or dodging freakers through the forest. The game also has a day and night cycle and dynamic weather that affects gameplay, making the world feel even more alive and unpredictable. At night, freakers are even more dangerous, which makes traveling feel tense and exciting. Now, yeah, this isn't a freaking 10 out of 10 masterpiece or something. Some missions feel repetitive and the pacing can drag at times, but the combination of story, open world freedom, and survival action mechanics makes it stand out. It's one of those games where if you give yourself time to just explore, fight, and ride around, you start to appreciate all the little details and the care put into the world. For anyone who loves open world games with a mix of danger, freedom, and a surprisingly emotional story, Days Gone is definitely worth checking out. It doesn't get nearly enough credit for how big and immersive it is. Mafia 2. Now, the Mafia series is in such a weird spot because it is some of the most beautiful and atmospheric open world games ever made, but a lot of people get mad at them because they are like Grand Theft Auto. If you go into these games expecting a big sandbox where you can fly planes and go on random rampages, you're going to be disappointed. But if you look at them as these massive playable movies, where the city is a big, detailed stage, they are honestly some of the best experiences you can have. Mafia 2 is the peak of the series for most fans, and for me, honestly. Mafia 1 was good, but it was short and didn't have a lot of stuff to do in the open world, or not at all. Mafia 2 has some activities, a bit longer story around 8 to 12 hours, I think, and a DLC too, which is not all that great but still worth it. And the newest Mafia the Old Country is good, but it's more like Mafia Definitive Edition, which is a remake of a 2002 game. The world is static. While it's beautiful, And there's literally nothing to do in the open world. That you can kill NPCs, there are no cops or anything. Well, because it's set in the old time, there's no population, no big city, so we ain't gonna talk about that. And Mafia 3 is big, the world is beautiful, but it had many performance issues and very repetitive gameplay, insanely repetitive, not just like a Ubisoft game, but like 10x more. So let's ignore that one as well, and let's just talk about Mafia 2. Now it is the peak of series. It took forever to make, almost 8 years, and it was developed by a team in the Czech Republic who wanted to capture the American dream in the 1940s and 50s vibe perfectly. So you play as Vito Scaletta, a war veteran who comes home to Empire Bay and finds out his family is in huge debt. He doesn't want to work a crappy job for no money, so he and his best friend Joe starts working for the mob. The world changes with you as the years go by, which is something almost no other game does. You start in the winter of 1945 with snow on the ground and old-fashioned music, and then halfway through the world shifts to the 1950s with bright colors, rock and roll, and faster cars. The gameplay mechanics in Mafia 2 are way more grounded and heavy than other open world games. The cars handle like real pieces of metal from that era, meaning they are slow to start and hard to stop, especially when the roads are icy. You actually have to worry about the police for things like speeding or crashing into other cars. If you drive too fast, the cops will pull you over and try to give you a ticket. Well, you can bribe them or get arrested, your choice. It makes you feel like you're part of a real world with rules, not just a playground where you can do whatever you want. Even the shooting feels punchy and dangerous. You can just stand out in the open because of a few bullets will actually take you down. What really makes this series underrated is how it handles the details. In Mafia 2, you can open the fridge in your apartment to drink a beer or eat a sandwich to heal, and you can even stop at a gas station to fuel up your car if the tank gets low. These things don't really add to the action, but they make you feel like you're living a life. In Mafia 1, it did a great job of bringing back, and Mafia 2, even though it was a bit repetitive, is one of the best depictions of the American South in the 60s ever put in a game. The series cares more about the vibe and the story than giving you a million map icons to click on. Rise of the Ronin. Team Ninja is famous for making really hard games like Nioh and Ninja Gaiden. But Rise of the Ronin is their first time trying a massive open world game, and it actually rules. It came out right at the same time as some other big huge games, so a lot of people just skipped it. Or thought the graphics looked a bit old, but they really are missing on some of the best combat you can find in any open world game right now. So you play as a nameless samurai called Veiled Edge during a time in Japan when everything was changing because Western countries were starting to show up with guns and new technology. The best thing about this game is how the fighting feels because it's fast and snappy and makes you feel like a total boss once you learn the timing. You have to parry attacks, which the game calls counter-sparking, and it's so satisfying to hear that clashing metal sounds and then finish off an enemy with cool animation. You get to use katanas, spears, even giant clubs that you get to use old school pistols, rifles, which keeps the gameplay feeling fresh. Now, the best thing about this game is how the fighting feels. Because it's fast and snappy and makes you feel like a total boss once you learn the timing, you have to parry attacks, which the game calls counter-sparking, and it's so satisfying to hear that clashing metal sound and then finish off an enemy with a cool animation. You get to use katanas and spears and even giant clubs, but you also get to use old school pistols and rifles, which keeps the gameplay feeling fresh. There are different fighting stances you can switch between on the fly, and it feels like a dance where you're constantly trying to find the best way to break your enemy's guard. Walking or riding your horse through the 19th century Japan is really cool because the world is split into big areas like Yokohama and Kyoto, and they feel very alive. You have a mechanical glider that looks like bird wings, and you can jump off a roof and soar over the streets and then use a grappling hook to zip back up to another building. There are a ton of side activities to do, like collecting stray cats or taking pictures of famous landmarks, and even though it sounds pretty simple, it actually makes you want to explore every corner of the map. Rage 2. Rage 2 drops you into this chaotic, post-apocalyptic world that's as messed up as it's colorful. It's the sequel to the first Rage game, but instead of being a slow, kind of serious shooter, this one goes full speed, full on crazy, and does not care about subtlety. The story is pretty simple. You're Walker, the last ranger left after the world went to hell, and you're trying to take down these insane gangs and a big evil corporation that's trying to control everything. It's not some deep emotional narrative, but that's fine because the game isn't trying to be a story heavy experience. What it's doing is letting you run, shoot, and explore everything in your path. The open world is huge and kind of beautiful in a destroyed, scorched earth kind of way. You've got deserts, ruined cities, forests that survived the apocalypse, and these little settlements where random gangs or survivors are doing their own thing. The world feels alive in that chaotic, unpredictable way. There's always some side quest or random encounter to pull you in. And what makes Rage 2 stand out is the combat. It mixes traditional gameplay with over-the-top abilities called nanotriders. You can dash through enemies, slam the ground to launch them into the air, or fire superpower attacks that look and feel amazing. Every encounter feels fast, explosive, and just fun to control. It's like the game rewards you for being aggressive, for moving around, and for not holding back at all. Vehicles also play a pretty big role, so you're constantly driving around in crazy cars and trucks that handle pretty well, honestly, which makes traveling between missions fun and dangerous at the same time. You can race across deserts while shooting after your car, hit jumps, or ram enemies and their vehicles, which just adds another layer to the chaos. The gun and upgrade system is satisfying too. You can mix and match weapons, modify them, and pair them with your nanotride powers to create combos that feel insanely powerful. The art style of Rage 2 is unique too, unlike most post-apocalyptic games that go for gray and depressing vibe, Rage 2 is bright, colorful, and ridiculous in a way that makes it feel different. The characters are over the top, the enemies are weird and varied, and the world itself has little details that makes it feel lived in, despite being destroyed. It's not perfect, sometimes the mission, and actually most of the time the missions can feel a bit too repetitive, and the story is really shallow, but the freedom to run and shoot in this open world and blow things up however you want makes it stand out from most open world shooters. Now, Rage 2 isn't trying to be a masterpiece, it's trying to be pure, chaotic fun, and it kinda nails that vibe. If you give it a chance, it feels like one of the most satisfying non-stop action open world games out there, and honestly, it's one of those games that deserved way more attention when it came out.